Gibraltar's built its success on being an agile and well-regulated jurisdiction. But as global regulation tightens and traditional advantages narrow, the question is, how do we diversify the economy? Good evening and welcome to Viewpoint. Tonight we examine the strengths and vulnerabilities of Gibraltar's economy, from gaming and financial services to insurance. We take a look at the prediction market as a potential new area of economic growth, as ADI Predict Street launches today after receiving its Gibraltar licence at record speed. And as the UK moves closer to the EU, where does Gibraltar fit? Well, joining me tonight is the Minister for Justice, Trade and Industry, Nigel Feetham. Thank you very much for joining us.
Good evening.
And also the GST's Shadow Minister for Public Finance and Financial Stability, Roy Clinton.
Good evening.
Thank you. Now, and if you've got any questions you'd like to put to the MPs, viewpoint@gbc.gi. So this is a very interesting topic because fundamentally everything that we do in Gibraltar, our education, our health, all that money comes from money that is brought in, inward investment to Gibraltar, and a huge part of that is financial services. The economy, and what we want to do is explore tonight at what those opportunities are, what those challenges are. But I'm going to start really broadly, first of all, and ask you, Minister, first of all, what does Gibraltar offer, do you think, as a business jurisdiction?
Ros, you've said it yourself in your introduction. Gibraltar is an agile jurisdiction. We are actually a diversified economy. We've got a strong economy. I know that obviously there are challenges ahead, especially in relation to the gaming sector because of the increase in the gaming tax that came into effect only last week. Gibraltar plays in the niche areas of economic development. In other words, we've been able to develop in Gibraltar over the last 30 years a digital economy that relies on innovation, that relies on Gibraltar being at the cutting edge of what we do. We have always led with first mover advantage, and that is precisely what we've done in the prediction space, in the prediction market space, and I'm sure we will be touching upon that later on in our discussion tonight.
We will do. Thank you very much for that. Mr. Clinton, anything there that you don't, not necessarily don't agree on, but is there anything else you'd like to add?
Well, yes. I mean, first of all, let me just say that, you know, and I've said this in Parliament, you know, when it comes to financial services gaming, there is no political divide. I think, you know, both sides of the House are one on this. What I would add to what Nigel has said is that, yes, we have to be nimble and where possible first. And we don't need a great deal of whatever cake it is. We just need a decent slice. But what is critical, I think, and I think has been the policy of successive governments, is that when we attract players, whether it's in gaming or in financial services, we always make sure we get quality. And so we haven't gone for quantity, we've gone for quality. That's whether it's a GSLP government or a GSD government, you'll find that's always been the approach. OK, well, we've got lots to talk about tonight. I do want to touch on something that I did mention in my introduction there. The UK is looking to build a closer tie towards the EU. So what role could Gibraltar play there, do you think, in that evolving relationship? As some sort of stepping stone?
Well, I think, Ross, the treaty is fundamental for the UK as much as it is fundamental for Gibraltar. In other words, the UK is looking at resetting its relationship with the European Union, and therefore Gibraltar provides that very stepping stone to allow them to do so. We've negotiated the treaty. We've got to give full credit to the Chief Minister and the negotiating team. There are clearly challenges ahead, but you know, we are hoping, and the government is hoping, I think the wider community is also hoping that with the ease at the frontier, in other words, there will not be a physical border, and therefore with the deal that has been negotiated with the European Union that allows us effectively to have Schengen access and our own customs union within the customs union, that will attract major investment in Gibraltar. Let's be clear, Ross, that had we not entered into the treaty, the alternative was actually very grim. In other words, not having a treaty would have been catastrophic for the economy of Gibraltar. It would have been catastrophic for those sectors of the economy that you have highlighted that are fundamental for Gibraltar's prosperity, namely gaming and financial services, which account for at least 50% of our economy.
OK, Mr. Clinton, what do you think?
Well, look, I mean, I've heard not just Nigel say this, but obviously the Chief Minister. But from where I sit in the House, I've got no visibility on this. We've had no impact surveys, we've had no analysis, nothing at all. So when we're told it's awful, I just have to take Nigel's word for it because I have no numbers to back that up.
Don't take my word for it, Roy.
Well, unfortunately, if you give me the numbers, it'd be great.
Well, don't take my word for it.
And before you start, bear in mind you've spoken about goods and people, but financial services, it's services. And the treaty doesn't cover services.
Okay, but no. But you see, this is where you're wrong, Roy. You see,
well, I can't be wrong.
Well, this is why.
I'm asking for information.
No. This is where you're wrong. You see, the treaty and ease of access at the frontier was fundamental to the gaming sector. In other words, the gaming sector accounts for the largest share of government revenues in the area of taxation. The gaming operators made it very clear to the government of Gibraltar that absent a treaty, they would have had to consider their presence in Gibraltar. In other words, you would have, according to that analysis...
Well, no, I haven't made that. I said I haven't got the information.
Well, I'm giving you the information.
Okay, fine,
it's very clear.
Minister...
But no, let me. Can I finish?
Okay.
If the gaming sector employs roughly 3,400 people in Gibraltar. If 70% of the labour force are Spanish resident labour that depend on ease of access through the frontier, then clearly, in the event of a hard border, that economic activity...
Can you define what you mean by hard border?
That economic activity would have been at risk.
They could have crossed anyway.
That economic activity would have been at risk of collapse. This is what the gaming sector were telling the government of Gibraltar.
But what's
and
your
therefore,
analysis?
Roy, let me say that you're being highly responsible. Highly responsible by suggesting...
I'm not suggesting anything. All I've said is I haven't had any data to back up what you said.
I'm telling you what the data is.
No, you tell me what you're saying. I haven't seen
3,400 jobs, over £100 million of government revenue.
Yes.
In fact, to be precise, £160 million of government revenue. That would have been at
Minister,
risk
can I ask you a question?
without a treaty. Clearly you have a hangover. You have a hangover with the treaty.
I don't.
But
one moment,
obviously,
I don't have a hangover with
you went to
anything.
Parliament supporting the very treaty. You voted for the treaty.
Let me get a question in here. What Mr. Clinton is saying, he hasn't seen any studies. He's not seen any studies. No one has. And I think the Chief Minister said that, so as not to give ammunition to, or, important information to potential enemies.
Ross, you don't need a study.
Have they?
If the gaming sector...
Of course you do. You don't need any feasibility studies.
I tell you why you don't need a study. If the gaming sector in Gibraltar tells the government of Gibraltar...
I'm not just talking gaming, I'm talking about the economy generally.
But that's £160 million. So in other words, you're putting... Had there not been a treaty, we would have severely put Gibraltar in a position where economically we would have been near to being crippled.
But that's not the question we're asking. We're just asking... the question I'm asking is, have any studies been done to see, what potential opportunities there are for Gibraltar's economy? But that's what we're... I think that is the question that we're trying to ask.
That is a different question. So therefore, I think the economic opportunities from a treaty, I think one of the areas primarily where we will see inward investment into Gibraltar is clearly in the area of high net worth individuals coming to Gibraltar because of the benefits of what the treaty gives them. In other words, the treaty allows a resident of Gibraltar, regardless of whether they are a blue or red card holder, to have Schengen access. That is an easier sell for Gibraltar than having a hard border where you would have struggled to attract inward investment to Gibraltar.
Criteria? What will be the new residence criteria?
We will very shortly. The Minister for Business, Gemma, and I have been working very closely over the last month on residence criteria.
Wasn't Joe involved in that committee as well?
We've taken a proposal to Cabinet. We've had at least 3 discussions in Cabinet, and I'm very pleased to say here tonight that we will shortly be making the residence criteria public. We've consulted the Finance Centre Council. We've consulted the Gibraltar Gaming and Betting Association. Gemma has consulted widely within her areas of ministerial responsibility. We haven't received any significant pushback from any of those associations or indeed stakeholders.
With respect, the Chief Minister said several weeks ago that it was going to be published shortly. So when you say shortly, can you give us an idea?
I would expect that we will publish it within the next few weeks.
OK. Let's move...
But that's really quite a time frame because I mean, when you're talking about being agile, that's not very agile. I mean, we've been talking about this for months.
Roy, we've got to get it right. In other
but
words,
how difficult
what you can't do is have it both ways. What you can't do is when we move and we try to move fast enough, you accuse us of rushing and moving too fast.
Said that.
When we take a step back and want to get it absolutely right,
you didn't take a step back, you stopped it overnight.
Because not getting it right could have a significant impact on the economy, you then say that actually we are not moving fast enough. We are moving at the pace which we believe is the responsible pace in which we ensure that we get it absolutely
surely
right.
You must have been ready in time for the 10th of April, otherwise you would have had the treaty implementation with no residency criteria in place.
The residency criteria have been agreed in principle by the Cabinet. We are now tweaking. We are now tweaking. We are now tweaking the requirements.
Let's move on because you've said that already. So let's move on because you've made that point. Let's talk about the gaming sector. The gaming sector in Gibraltar took a massive hit recently. We know that the UK. This is the thing about Gibraltar's financial services is a lot of it is subject to control and regulation outside of Gibraltar. Yes. That's not within our control. And one of the issues here was that the UK Treasury in the UK put up gambling taxes, and that's impacted the industry.
Doubled the rate of taxes.
Yeah. Now, what is the latest indication of the corporate tax shortfall arising from that measure, the UK gaming tax increase, which took effect on the 1st of April?
I've explained it on a number of occasions, Ros, and I've come here in a previous programme where we debated this very issue with Roy, that the gaming tax, in fact, came into effect on the 1st of April. So therefore, we will know very quickly exactly what the impact is, albeit that the tax only came into effect on the 1st of April. We expect the impact to be significant. Now, how significant is significant? I think a conservative estimate, and this is certainly the estimate that we're working on, both as the tax ministry and indeed the gambling commission, is that we expect conservatively to have an impact of at least £40 million of government revenues. Now, £40 million, yes, for this financial year, the year that started on the 1st of April, only last week. £40 million is obviously a significant amount. If you remember, Ros, when I devised and implemented the national tax strategy in my first full budget year, I was able to raise an additional corporate tax revenues in the region of around £58 million. That was a record for Gibraltar.
Although in 50 million was exceptional.
I'll touch upon that in a minute. Yeah. So the record tax receipts took us then in my first full budget to £212 million. Roy says that it's exceptional. We had a debate in the budget. Can I finish?
Can I finish?
We had a debate in the last budget last year, July last year, where the word exceptional was used by the opposition.
No, it's in your book. It's in the estimates book.
But
but this is important.
And the Chief Minister
I said to Ross, I said to Roy across the floor of the House, I said, Roy, the way that I would categorise the fact that we've achieved these record tax receipts by not putting personal tax up. In fact, we started the tax year by reducing personal taxes by 1%, which cost me
on those above 100,000 people.
16 million pounds. I said to Roy, it's not exceptional, it's truly exceptional. And I said to Roy, we will do it again. I've also publicly said here in a programme, this is important, Ross, and I've said it in Parliament, that actually when we close the financial year on the 31st of March this year, our tax revenues were not £212 million, exceptional as they were £252 million.
Is that sustainable?
Is truly exceptional.
Yeah, but next year it will happen.
And that was not by accident. That was an implementation of a carefully executed tax strategy that I came to this programme and I explained it within a month of being elected.
OK, so let me ask you this. I mean, I asked you whether that was sustainable, that sort of level of revenue. Does that covers clearly the 40 million hole this year, does it?
Well, there is no hole this year because I brought in excess of £100 million this year, if we take into account that the base revenue figure that I inherited when I became Minister for Taxation was 155.
Right.
So clearly,
there is no hole.
It's the biggest revenue collection in the history of Gibraltar.
The problem is, Ros, the next year, as Nigel's obviously alluded to, we could have a problem, and the level of revenue is not guaranteed.
Yeah.
And this is the thing we have to keep an eye on.
Well, so tell
if you look at the accounts of one of the big gaming companies, they've already made big provisions. It's public information.
Yeah. So
they made big provisions for losses. Yes, you're right.
So for next year, then.
Well, we've only started the financial year 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
I mean, I need a little bit of a respite.
Well,
I know that I've delivered 2 record budgets over the last 2 years.
Give me a little bit of
a respite.
With respect,
please.
It was you that was on Viewpoint that said that this was going to cause a massive hole
and I'm not going to avoid.
No,
and I am not going to avoid the question because you're absolutely right, and therefore I have said also on GBC on a number of occasions that the balance sheet of the government is not just revenue, it's also expenditure. And we've got to look at expenditure. I've made that point on many occasions, but you see, when we talk about expenditure, Ros, I've got to make it very clear what expenditure means. And this is an important point. Before we allocate any government expenditure, as the Minister for Taxation, I've got to raise enough revenue in Gibraltar to be able to pay £95 million of public sector pensions and between 18, 19 and 20 million pounds of public sector salaries. In other words, before I spend a single penny on any other item of budgetary expenditure, including the GHA, elderly care services, education, we've got to put aside, in order to meet just those 2 budgetary expenses, in excess of £320 million. It's a big ask.
Let me ask Mr. Clinton, are we closing tax loopholes and taking advantage of, the tax that should be paid, or is it that you see there's more corporate, more companies coming into Gibraltar, hence more corporate revenue?
Well, look,
I'm asking you that question. I can ask you the same question.
Nigel will have the information to answer the second part of your question. But in the first part of the question, look, there were always anti-avoidance provisions in terms of taxation. There should be no tax loopholes. And if they were, certainly they should have been closed.
Yeah.
They shouldn't exist. But I'm glad to hear Nigel talking about expenses because, of course, he's Minister for Taxation. He's not the Minister for Finance. And as I've said before, and I've said in a Chronicle interview, and I think Nigel did a piece, I said you've got to take a whole picture. It's not just the revenue. You've got to look at revenue and the expenditure. So you match the two together ideally.
Yeah.
And you have a break-even or surplus.
Okay.
Can I answer the question?
You can answer the question and then we're going to move on.
Yes, I mean, I probably would need 2.5 hours, 3 hours to actually take you through how we devised the tax strategy and how we implemented. So clearly, one aspect of the tax strategy was making sure that we closed the gap between income, which should have been taxed, and income that wasn't taxed. Clearly, that was an aspect of the tax strategy, and that is why we increased our resources within the tax office, and we employed 2 senior tax specialists, and more recently, over the last 6 months, we've employed 2 junior tax accountants. But what we also did is, and remember that I was practicing for 31 years, and when Fabian and I, when the Chief Minister and I spoke before the election, I did a presentation to Fabian, and I said, Fabian, this is what I would like to do with the tax ministry, and this is what I would like to implement in Gibraltar through a tax strategy. He believed in the tax strategy, rightly so, because we've delivered the revenues that we've delivered, which has delivered for the government of Gibraltar in excess of £150 million over the last 2 years. But we've looked at targeted tax measures. For example, it's areas which are highly technical, where the important point to make is that the way that we've done it in a targeted manner allowed us to raise the revenue, consulting stakeholders without one company in Gibraltar leaving. And that's the difference between what we've done and what the UK government has done. And when I sat down with UK Treasury and we had a discussion around the proposed implementation of what they were thinking of doing, in other words, increasing gaming tax, I took them through the tax strategy and I said, you've got it completely wrong. They spoke about growing the economy. They've got it wrong. It's not about growing the economy. Any politician that doesn't understand economics or economic development will talk about growing the economy. What you need to do is you need to grow productivity, and then what you need to do is to increase tax revenues without increasing the tax rate. And there's a difference, and I've explained that on GBC on many occasions.
We are here to talk about diversifying the economy rather than just tax, so I'm going to move on slightly.
Remember that if I've raised £150 million of additional revenue, you can't do that unless you've diversified the economy that allows you to deliver that revenue.
Right, OK, point made. I want to ask you whether there are any further UK decisions that could potentially still have an additional negative impact on Gibraltar's economy.
OK. When Gareth Snell, a Labour MP, he's a backbencher, obviously have a relationship with Gareth, and let me say that I'm extremely grateful to Gareth for engaging with us in our discussions with him, specifically in relation to the gaming sector. In the last budget session in Parliament, Gareth asked the Secretary of the Exchequer, in other words, the Treasury Minister, Minister, are there any other surprises for Gibraltar in the pipeline? Because Gibraltar, at this point in time, needs certainty and stability. The Treasury Minister declined to answer the question, Ros. I think he avoided the question entirely by saying that he wasn't going to take budgetary decisions on the floor of the House. Am I concerned? Oh, yes, I am concerned. I am concerned that the UK government might come back for more. And if they come back
in the gaming sector or other areas?
I think, I mean, I've got to be very careful, Ros, that I don't give too much away because, people are listening. But I am concerned that, that they do come back for more. And if they do come back for more, that clearly causes an issue for Gibraltar. But let me say that behind closed doors, I have made it absolutely clear to the UK Treasury that Gibraltar is in no position whatsoever to be able to take a second knock of the kind that we took in relation to the gaming sector. You can rest assured that we will fight Gibraltar's corner robustly.
They don't seem to be too... I mean, there are some people who are fighting Gibraltar's corner, but certainly those that made the decision with the gaming company, certainly the Treasury, had information on how it would impact Gibraltar's economy, and it made no difference to them.
I gave them all the information, Ros. I sat down with them.
But it made no difference
It made no difference, and it made no difference, and I articulated the arguments to them, and the arguments was not just the impact that the decision could have on Gibraltar. I said to them very clearly, you are saying that you're earmarking £1 billion of revenue raised from this proposed measure. I said to them, you're not going to raise £1 billion. And I explained very clearly to them that all they would do was drive that business that would be legitimately placed with UK and Gibraltar gaming firms into the black market.
And do you think that's going to happen?
Well, it has happened. It has happened. So I continue to be engaged and work very closely with the gaming sector in Gibraltar. I meet them weekly. I engage and communicate with them weekly. I am told categorically that they have already seen the evidence of punters going into and placing bets with the black market. In other words, with those companies that have no regard for customer safety or customer ethical behaviour.
OK. Well, we're going to talk about the prediction market now, because unless, Mr Clinton, there's something you want to add about the gaming.
Well, the only thing I was going to add was, apart from the black market, you've actually seen gaming companies, certainly in England, in terms of their high street presence, closing down shops. Yeah? So, in terms of what the UK Treasury thought they were going to do, they're actually going to get X% of less, because the business is not going to be there.
Yeah, that was always the argument, wasn't it, from industry?
And they've done it. In other words, what Roy is absolutely right. What the gaming sector has done is to mitigate the tax impact. In other words, so that viewers can understand it again, and I've repeated this on a number of occasions, the gaming tax is a tax on revenue, so therefore it hits your top line. And therefore, to the extent that it hits your top line, the UK government is extracting the revenues from gaming companies in Gibraltar. So by the time that what is left over hits the bottom line, there's very few profits remaining. So the way to mitigate that, which is what the gaming companies have been doing, is cutting their marketing spend, reducing bonuses, and indeed closing betting shops in the UK. The gaming companies that are operating and licensed in Gibraltar are huge gaming companies with huge physical presence in the UK market. So what is optimistic for us, however, Ros, and I don't want to take the credit for this, but we are working. But
you will.
But I will, because we are working very closely with gaming companies here. We have an understanding, I wouldn't put it more than just an understanding, that before they get to redundancies in Gibraltar, they've got to make sure that they do everything possible to mitigate the cost and the impact of that tax. So they've started with marketing spend, they've started with bonuses, they've closed betting shops in the UK. However, there are some companies in Gibraltar that clearly are not going to be able to compete at the level which they would expect to do so. And at some point, I do expect an impact in Gibraltar. I was in the UK last week, Ros, and I met a gaming operator in the UK that very shortly will be submitting a license application in Gibraltar. And in every challenge, there is always an opportunity. And if you look at the UK gaming market, you will see that actually the companies, and it happens in any market that is disrupted. I've been working in this sector for 32 years. In every market where there is a market disruption, be it tax or competition, you will find that the companies that are most impacted are always the larger companies. And therefore, there is a space in the middle between the large companies and the small companies. The small companies will always struggle to compete with the large companies. There's a middle space there of companies that are agile, to use your terminology, agile, that they themselves are what we call challenger companies. So I expect to be able to bring to Gibraltar, by the end of this calendar year, a number of challenger companies in Gibraltar. That's a very good start.
OK, thank you very much. We are going to look at some other areas of diversification. You've already mentioned the prediction market. You think it could be an area for growth. What do you think about it? What does Mr. Clinton think about it? Find out after the break. We'll be back in just a few moments. Hello and welcome back to Viewpoint. We're talking about diversifying Gibraltar's economy. We've talked about gaming industry, and we've talked about the tax revenue that the minister has brought in record amounts of revenue this year, which has helped, which will help with the shortfall in corporate tax revenues, the £40 million the Minister has mentioned that is the result of the UK Treasury raising gaming duties, doubling them. I want to talk now about the prediction market. This is something that's quite new, and I must confess, not something that I knew a great deal about. You announced last week that a new company, ADI Predict Street, had been issued with Gibraltar's first license in the prediction market. Okay, so I can see it's something that you're very proud of. And you did it in record time, and you said that this could be a new era of economic growth for the jurisdiction. So I was doing a bit of research about the prediction market, and essentially what it is that you can predict on anything, anything that's happening in life, whether it's a war, whether it's an election, or whether it's a sporting thing or whatever. Interestingly, in the US, they deal with it as a financial derivative. So that's subject to different regulation to what we have here. And here it's more about protecting the consumer, isn't it, if I'm not wrong, because it's been issued with a gambling license. I want to ask you some questions, because when I put in ADI Predict Street...
Shall I maybe tackle some
Not
of that?
yet, though.
Okay.
Let me put a few things to you. Okay. So I did a bit of research on ADI Predict Street.
One at a time? One question at a time? Or?
Well, let's just listen to what I have to say, and then I'll ask you to comment. Okay. So I did some research on ADI Predict Street, and here we are. This is Front Office Sports. It's an online publication, and it says FIFA's official...
Not a mainstream... It
has a big following, and it is quite respected in the industry. But I've got others as well in case
Okay.
iGaming today. FIFA's new prediction market, because it's formed a partnership with FIFA for the World Cup, right?
That is factually correct.
Okay, so FIFA's new prediction market partner faces transparency questions. FIFA's decision to appoint ADI Predict Street as its official prediction market for the World Cup has quickly drawn scrutiny. It says Predict Street has yet to launch a functioning website or application. The firm recently obtained a license in Gibraltar, but that approval only covers the territory's small population of 38,000. Predict Street has no legal status outside of Gibraltar, which means this limitation means its services cannot extend beyond the territory, raising questions about how it will deliver on FIFA's global ambitions. Let me also put to you a few other articles.
Sure.
This is Front Office Sport, and it says it calls it obscure Abu Dhabi blockchain project.
Okay.
Here it says the multi-year deal isn't with either of the two giants of the space, which is Kalshi and I can't remember what it's called now. Polymarket.
Clearly, the competition is concerned.
Nor
that
with any. Well, this is
moving
this company
in the same space as they are obviously taking a lion's share of the international market.
This only launched today. So it's very new, very few followers at the moment, and that is why they are questioning that it's quite unusual.
But you could say that with any startup operation, Ros. You see, and let me pick up and let me unpack. Can I unpack what you said?
One minute. I also want to put this to you as well, because and then I will let you have your say.
Okay.
Let me also put to you the fact that the manager, the person that runs it's owned by the Abu Dhabi royal family, but the person that runs it, Ajay Hans Raj Bhatia, has last year settled insider trading charges with the Securities and Exchange Board of India after he was accused of buying shares in a group of companies. And what do you say to that? I think he put a bet of 900,000. After finding out, here we go, investigators said he carried out trades worth more than $900,000 after receiving advance notice of a $2 billion investment in the firm.
Can I unpack everything you've said, Ross? Okay, let me start. First of all, you've said that this is something new. Actually, it's a reinvention of what was already there 20 years ago. And let me just explain, and I'll take you through everything, and hopefully I'll be able to tackle all the points that you've raised with me. What we've licensed in Gibraltar in order to operate in the prediction markets. The prediction market is a generic term. What we've done is we've licensed a gambling company as an gambling intermediary. In other words, within our legislation, we are entitled and able to license companies as intermediaries. And in the prediction space, the way that these companies operate is that they are peer-to-peer operations. In other words, instead of placing a bet, however you define what the bet is, with a traditional bookmaker or a gaming company where you have the house or the casino that sets the odds, what this innovation, and actually it's not an innovation, I'll explain why it's not an innovation, it's a reinvention of what was already there. What it allows is a participant to place a bet, in other words, a forecast with another participant. That's why it's called peer-to-peer. 20 years ago, I licensed in Gibraltar a betting exchange. It's in the public domain. That betting exchange still functions within the operations of the largest gaming company in the world, Flutter. It still functions as a betting intermediary, as a betting exchange. I licensed that in Gibraltar 20 years ago. The difference is that the technology has moved far more than what it was 20 years ago. There is clearly a growing demand in this particular area. Let me say also that today, Flutter, the largest gaming company in the world, has announced today, and you could do a Google search as I speak, and you'll be able to verify that. Flutter has announced today that their betting intermediary in the UK, licensed in the UK in the same way as this is licensed in Gibraltar, will be offering services within their platform in the prediction space. what we've done in Gibraltar, actually, is clearly rocked the boat with those operators, and there's only 2 in the world, that have the lion's share of the market. They are both licensed in the US, as you rightly have pointed out, where there is a dispute in the US between the gaming regulator and the financial services regulator as to whether it should be regulated as financial services or gaming. That's in the US. In Gibraltar, we license and regulate it as a gaming company. The UK licenses and regulates it also as a gaming company. You're absolutely right also in saying that the owners, the ultimate beneficial owners of this company that we license in Gibraltar, the royal family of Abu Dhabi. In fact, the intermediate holding company is the sovereign wealth fund of Abu Dhabi. In other words, one of the largest investment funds in the world. In other words, if I were to identify the largest 5 sovereign investment funds in the world, Abu Dhabi would be amongst them. You've also pointed out, and I need to address this, that a member of the council of one of the companies, not the sovereign wealth fund, but one of the companies that is obviously associated with this project, you've made and you've read out from your report certain allegations that were made against an individual that is involved in the project. Let me say that was picked up in the due diligence that was done, and the gambling commissioner recommended to me that we should still license the company given the ultimate ownership of the company, given the business plans, and given the huge investment opportunity for Gibraltar. Let me also say that if you look at the terms of the settlement agreement, and I don't know whether this is public information, and therefore I will put it on record tonight, because obviously I've got to make sure that we do not tarnish the reputation of the gentleman that you've obviously named here tonight on this program. The settlement...
He was already named publicly, actually. I'm just reading what's been
sure, but let me put it down on record here now. So let me say, for the record, that the settlement agreement that he entered into was without any admission as to liability. That is the standard settlement agreement that is reached in circumstances where a regulator is not able to prove the facts beyond an allegation. And in order to avoid protracted litigation and the expense and the trauma of a process, the person enters into a settlement agreement where it's clearly set out, and the regulator agrees also, beyond peradventure, that there is no admission of liability.
OK, Mr. Clinton, before I ask for your opinion, can I just ask you about what it says in the article about the fact that the company has no legal status outside of Gibraltar, and that means it can only trade with Gibraltar's population?
No, but you can say that. But this is factually incorrect, and I'll tell you why it's factually incorrect. You can say that about any gaming company in Gibraltar. If you look at the international gaming market, you will see that if you look at the global market, you will see that some markets are regulated markets, some markets are unregulated markets, some markets are what they call, I don't like the terminology myself, and I've said it on many occasions, the grey market, which is that a jurisdiction doesn't have a defined prohibition preventing an overseas gaming company from offering services to local residents. So you could say that about any gaming company.
Let's bring Mr. Clinton. Let's bring Mr. Clinton in. What is your view of the prediction market? Is that something that we want to nurture and grow in Gibraltar?
Well, look, I mean, we've always said that we want to be, as Nigel said, using your words, agile.
Yes.
It is definitely the word of the night.
Well, it is the word of the night, and it's your word. And in order to be agile, you've got to try and be at the cutting edge of new business opportunities. Now, what you also want to do is obviously mitigate any risk or downside to a jurisdiction. And the way you do that is, as Nigel said, by doing your due diligence on applicants. And as I said before, I mean, the policy has always been, in terms on gaming and financial services, is to attract quality, and to make sure that we only offer the platform of Gibraltar to those entities that we're comfortable with, and that respect, the concept of regulation and their responsibilities. And as we enter this prediction market now, whether it's an extension of existing gaming platforms in a different form or an entirely new way of doing business, obviously we have to be aware of what the risks are, make sure that the regulation is there to address those risks. And if the regulation isn't there, I'm sure the Minister, Nigel, will bring an amendment to Parliament and will tweak the legislation as needed.
You talk about legislation and Gibraltar's reputation. This is very, very important. How does the government propose to maintain Gibraltar's very, very carefully cultivated and highly regulated reputation with an industry really that actually encourages people to place bets on wars. Now, The Independent today has actually run a story about the poly market in the USA. Here it says a wallet opened 12 minutes before Trump's post about a ceasefire, placing a bet a ceasefire was going to happen on a day when he talked about the whole civilization will die. And they made thousands and thousands of pounds out of it. How ethical is that?
I'll answer the question. Well, I don't need to.
How do we protect our reputation?
Well, I am not here as the Minister of the Government of Gibraltar to defend a company Polymarket that is licensed in the US. That is a matter for the gaming regulator in the US.
How do we prevent that kind of practice?
Yes, and I'll answer the question. We have licensed Predict Street to operate in sporting events. That is what we've done in this license and the first phase of the approval that we've granted. On the back of that, they've announced a major sponsorship arrangement with FIFA that clearly gives them a high level of visibility. What we are doing as a responsible jurisdiction, and indeed what the gaming regulator in Gibraltar is doing as a responsible regulator, is working with the company in order to ensure that before they go live with a product, you address any ethical issues, as Roy, and I agree with Roy now, as Roy has rightly highlighted. What I can't do is obviously comment on an article which in the context of Gibraltar is entirely hypothetical.
You don't have to comment on that specifically. You said, for example, ADI Predict Street is licensed purely for sporting.
We've approved...
Would you be looking to diversify and grow that area?
Obviously, we are looking at being able to progress the business in a controlled manner, provided the gaming regulator is happy with the way that the operations are structured and any ethical considerations that need to be taken into account.
So potentially people could in the future place bets on elections and the outcome of a war. Could they?
I think.
Would you draw the line?
No, but that is not. You see, that is a matter which the regulator at the appropriate time will need to consider. I don't need to make a value judgment on that here tonight on this program. We have been able to secure what I believe is a major investment for Gibraltar. And let me put it into perspective for you. On the back of this, today I have been invited by the government of Salvador to travel to Salvador next year. Salvador has actually become the digital capital of South America. They're clearly interested in what we are doing in Gibraltar, so they've asked me whether I'm willing to go there and to address major institutional investors, and I've said in principle, subject to being able to secure flights, which I believe I will be able to do tomorrow, I will be on a plane Sunday and Monday, because it's the only way that we can address the challenges that Gibraltar is clearly facing. What we cannot do is to say, well, I'm going to have a £40 million budget hit, if you like, not a budget deficit, a budget hit next year, and not look at the opportunities that allow us to be able to secure revenues for Gibraltar, to pay for public sector salaries, to pay for public sector pensions, to pay for healthcare, to pay for hospitals.
We will talk about that, but we haven't finished talking about the prediction
Okay,
market yet. I'm afraid so. Are you concerned, Mr. Clinton, that this is a street, this is a direction that we're going to, that could potentially see? The Minister doesn't want to comment on it. But
no, I said that we don't have to make that value judgment
But are you concerned
today.
about it?
Well, look, anything that has an ethical angle to it, obviously, is of concern. But of course, what is ethical to you may not be ethical to me. So where you draw that line is purely
Okay. Well, I'm asking you a very clear
subjective.
question.
But let him finish.
No, let me finish.
The question is
subjective, but of course there are certain things which we can all agree on are unethical, and that is where the regulator has to come in and draw a line and say, well look, at the moment, we're not prepared to go beyond this.
Well, I've got two MPs here tonight who don't want to say what, whether they consider.
But you see,
whether
he's right. I'm sorry. I'm going to agree.
No, but
now I'm going to agree. Now I'm going to agree with the honourable Mr. Clinton.
Everyone is talking about it.
And he's. Let him finish.
Sorry.
You finish.
No, but he's absolutely right. In other words, you mentioned betting on the outcome of political events. For example, some jurisdictions don't permit, and actually it's a minority of jurisdictions, not a majority of jurisdictions, don't permit gambling on political events purely for political reasons, and because their gambling legislation is not developed enough to allow them to regulate and license that particular sector. That doesn't mean that because somebody doesn't want to do it, all of a sudden Gibraltar says, actually, we're not going to allow any companies to allow individuals between themselves, peer-to-peer, to bet on the outcome of a general election outside Gibraltar. So, I mean, I don't see the ethical consideration in that particular area. Now, in terms of a war on the outcome of a war, yes, I see the ethical issue there.
Okay.
And we will address those ethical issues at the appropriate time.
Okay, what about insider knowledge? Because, and I'm asking you this question because this is a new area.
Oh, but we stamp out insider information wherever
Yes,
we
but
find
I
it.
don't think that'll be acceptable to
Hold
anyone.
That wouldn't be acceptable to anybody. So
Let me finish asking my question, please. There's a reason I'm asking this question, and that's because in the United States it is an issue. Because in the United States, because they deal with it as a financial derivative, they have more robust enforcement when it comes. It's a serious crime. But from what I have read, with gaming, it's not as easy to enforce when there is insider. Because you can get people with who are wealthy who might try to manipulate the markets.
Any conduct which is insider trading is by the very nature illegal in the relevant domestic jurisdiction where the crime is alleged to have been committed. So there's no doubt about it. For example, if you came to me, Ros, and you said there's a company in Gibraltar where somebody has taken a position and they've abused effectively knowledge that they shouldn't have used in order to be able to gain a personal advantage, that is a criminal offence. It's a criminal offence elsewhere, and it would be a criminal offence which our authorities in Gibraltar would cooperate with the jurisdiction. I mean, as Minister for Justice, I get requests for exchange of information all the time. I'm not going to disclose what types of requests I get, and as Justice Minister, I've never denied a single request for information.
Okay.
This is no different.
Well, if you look at concerns, which I did, doing a bit of research today, one of the concerns is that a privileged few can easily distort market perception on these prediction markets.
But you can do that in Bitcoin.
But you can do that with Bitcoin. You can do that in the financial markets. You can do that in a stock exchange to the extent that somebody's caught.
The regulation is different with the financial.
No, it's not, because it's a crime, and therefore, if it's a crime, then the jurisdiction acts upon criminal offences, regardless of where they're committed.
Okay, let me ask you this. Do you see as a concern if Gibraltar licence operators are allowed to use cryptocurrency as a payment method? Is the regulator equipped to deal with that?
They do it now, Ros.
I'm asking you.
I'm not laughing. I'm not laughing.
But I'm actually putting questions to you from the industry.
No, I'm not laughing.
From the industry, Mr. Feetham. They're not my questions.
Okay, so I'll answer the question. It does happen already. In other words, it does happen already.
Okay, let's move on from the prediction market then, because you've obviously defended it robustly, and I wanted to put to you a lot of concerns that I've picked up.
No, you're right to put these questions to me.
I think they are genuine concerns that people have, quite frankly.
You're absolutely right.
So I have put them to you.
No, and thank you for doing that. I'm really grateful to you.
I'm sorry if they've come across as being a bit stupid.
No, they're not stupid at all. Okay. As a journalist, it's your obligation to put uncomfortable questions to me.
Okay, let's move on to, you talked about getting on a plane and selling Gibraltar. What is the government doing in terms of selling Gibraltar, marketing Gibraltar internationally? Okay. And what are you selling exactly?
Okay. So that I got this absolutely right. I knew the answer before I got it. Not that I thought that you would ask the question, but last week I said to my team, guys, I don't want to be the minister here that says that we're doing a wonderful job and that, you know, we've been doing all this stuff and all this work for the people of Gibraltar, and it's not just tax, it's not just gaming. You tell me, give me the number of events or conferences that we've attended or hosted in the last 15 months. In other words, an event that we've attended, that ministerially we have attended, or that we have hosted as a conference or an event in the last 15 months. They came back to me and they said, and they gave me a list, and they said, Minister, over the last 15 months, you have done or attended 15 major events or conferences, which includes, and the ones that obviously you're aware of, because I've made it a point of publicising this, because I want to make sure that the people of Gibraltar do realise the work that is doing. And I think where I think that perhaps we've made the mistake at the ministry is that we don't publicise ourselves enough. You know, I do say that we've done record things, but perhaps I should say it more often. What we don't say, and what we don't say publicly, is the things that we've done. So we went to the largest gaming conference in the world in January. That was the ICE conference. We went to the largest digital asset conference in Hong Kong, the Consensus Hong Kong Conference. We are going, as I said, I've been invited by the government of Salvador to attend a major event next week. No sooner do I come back than I'm attending the largest digital asset conference on the other side of the world in Miami.
A question here. Derek says, Mr. Feetham, you say that there's, you know, we have a strong economy, yet there seems to be a contradiction because the government comes out and says there's no money for this or that. So perhaps the minister should come clean and tell the people of Gibraltar, have we got a strong economy or not?
Okay, but you see, he's making a fundamental mistake, Derek. I don't know who Derek is, but you're making a fundamental mistake. You're saying, and you're confusing, public expenditure with whether or not we have a strong economy. You can have a strong economy, but clearly, if you look at the other side of the balance sheet, if you're carrying the expenditure of the sort that I've highlighted here tonight, which are public sector salary, public sector pensions, are you suggesting that we don't pay that? Is anybody suggesting that we don't pay our public servants?
I don't think he was suggesting that. I think it was more, for example,
I think, Ros, if I can get a word in, I think the issue here is about priorities, spending priorities. And look, I hear it from people who tell me that, you know, yes, record revenues, but there isn't money to fix X, Y, or Z. But of course, there's always money to pay legal bills, which people don't understand. Yeah? And I think it's about priorities. People don't see that they're being prioritised.
Right. Okay, a question for Nigel.
I mean, there are £150 million or more of revenues that we've put back into the economy.
Spent.
So, I mean, I can't be criticised for that.
Mr. Feetham, I'm going to go back to this question because I did say to you that people are concerned, okay, and that's why I asked you questions.
You must put the question.
Here is another question: How would you prevent prediction markets from profiting off harmful real-world events like wars, wildfires, or disasters? Given that in places like the United States, a significant portion of activity comes from people betting on exactly those outcomes. And more broadly, what distinguishes prediction markets from gambling? In your view, why should they be treated differently from betting rather than as a form of futures trading?
Well, I think I've actually answered. I think I've answered the questions, and I've said that the gaming regulator will develop products with operators that deal with the ethical issues. The reason why we've regulated this as gambling primarily is that most countries in the world actually regulated as gambling. It falls very clearly within our gambling legislation. The UK treats it as gambling. I've said today that Flutter, the largest gaming company in the world, today has announced that they will enter the prediction markets from their UK license.
Okay. Mr. Clinton, we're talking about diversifying the economy, and we really have got stuck on prediction markets because something's so new, and we've talked about gaming. What would you like to see? Where would you like to see Gibraltar's economy diversify further? What more could we do that we're not doing, particularly with the treaty?
Well, that's a very big question. The first thing, Rosa, I want to say is, look, when we say the word economy, you know, and we've been talking about gaming and financial services. Obviously, Gibraltar's economy is quite broad, and in a way, we're quite lucky in that, you know, we have tourism, we have some light industry, we've got the dockyard. There are other things that we do in Gibraltar, and we're not entirely dependent on just gaming, although it is a very big contributor to the economy. And what we need to do, I feel, is apart from attracting new business, we have to make sure we retain the business that we have, and we do whatever we can do to make ourselves an attractive jurisdiction for them to stay and to bring in new business. But that means that we have to, as a jurisdiction, you know, whether government or government employees have to actually work together to deliver those kind of services that will keep the business in Gibraltar. And that will be true across all the sectors, not just gaming, financial services. It'll be true in tourism, all other areas where, you know, people need business licenses and they can't afford to wait months. So we have to keep our eye on the ball and realize that, you know, we are living not just in a very dangerous world, but in a very competitive world. And we have to make our case as to why people should come here and do business, and we can't be complacent. You know, what worked yesterday...
Are you happy with the work Mr. Feetham is doing?
Well, look, you know, I'm glad that he is working, and he's probably one of the hardest working ministers opposite in government.
Thank you.
And, you know, that's what he's there to do. And, you know, we have to do more of it. And unfortunately, you know, we can't believe that what happened in the past is always going to happen in the future. We have to keep on reinventing ourselves.
All right, Mr. Feetham, we've got gaming, we've got insurance, which we haven't touched on tonight. We've got prediction markets.
We can touch on insurance if you want.
We haven't got time, unfortunately. But we already have them. What I'm interested in from you...
Are we finishing already?
Already, yeah. And what I'm interested in from you is what other areas have we not tapped into that we can still tap into?
Okay, we've got to look at those areas which are suited to Gibraltar. In other words, Gibraltar is small, it's a small geographical area. We have a small labour pool in Gibraltar, so therefore within those constraints, the area which clearly is best adapted to Gibraltar is those areas that relate to the digital economy. So everything is interconnected. When we talk about gaming, for example, and we say gaming, people think about gambling. Actually, if you look at the gaming sector in Gibraltar, the ecosystem that we've developed in Gibraltar, it's connected to payment services, it's connected to the crypto industry, it's all very interconnected. What we need to do is more of the same. I used to call it when I was a former visiting law professor, and I published a number of books, and the underlying theme of every book that I published was economic development. That's why I love the job that I'm doing. I used to call it the herd instinct. I used to say, and I practiced for 32 years, and I was at the cutting edge of the sectors in Gibraltar when I was in private practice as well. I used to say, all it takes is one operator. You bring one operator to Gibraltar, you get the sort of publicity that we've got. Some of it clearly is negative, and you've highlighted that to me tonight, but I hope that I've addressed those criticisms, those allegations tonight. If you get the right sort of media publicity, and I believe that we have in the space that we've discussed tonight, it's the herd. The herd will always follow the first entrant in the market.
Okay.
We need it. Gibraltar needs to reinvent itself, given the challenges that we're facing. But every challenge brings an opportunity.
Okay, thank you very much. I mean, there is a lot more to discuss here, and it's been a very lively discussion. So thank you very much for joining me. And
thank you.
We will see you again next week at the same time. Thank you for joining us. Good night.